everybody. I'm Richard Pennington. I'm speaking to you from line 3 of the Seoul subway. This is August 15, 2015. 70 years ago today, Japan surrendered and brought World War II to a close. It also meant that the long Japanese military, political, and economic domination of Korea was over. Every year since, Liberation Day, or Kwangbok-chol, which means Restoration of Life, has been celebrated. The Ministry of Sports, Tourism, and Culture has designated the theme of Great Journey, New Leap, as citizens reflect on 70 years of joy, sorrow, and achievement. I'm joined today by my friends Tae-gun Chap, Ji-sun Kim, Anthony Kim, Steve Shin, Eun-soo Kim, also known as Kenny, Mirye Lee, and Chung Eun-ri. Our plan is to visit 10 places in Seoul that pertain to Liberation Day. And our purpose? It is threefold: to inform, to experience, and to commemorate. We are at the Japanese Embassy in the Jongno District. I thought it might be appropriate to start here since much of our tour today will involve the Japanese. The Japanese colonial era in Korea is said to have lasted from 1910 until 1945, but in fact it goes back much further. They imposed an unequal treaty in 1876, giving themselves all kinds of legal and economic rights. In 1905, Japan made Korea a protectorate with the connivance of the USA. They would respect each other's colonial ambitions. The crass deal went like this. The Americans got the Philippines and the Japanese got Korea. Shame on the United States for being a party to these actions. Finally, in 1910, Korea was annexed. Make no mistake, in the view of our neighbors to the east, Korea was to become a permanent part of the Japanese Empire. They came perilously close to succeeding. Had the Japanese not overreached, trying to conquer China and Southeast Asia as well, in Korea they would have gotten some new territory and extracted a lot of wealth. Of course, I have to say a few words about the, quote, comfort women. Starting in 1932, the Japanese government forced some 140,000 women and girls, 80% of them Korean, into sexual slavery. Hirohito soldiers had to be given comfort, you know. These horrific crimes did not end until 70 years ago today. We are standing at the spot where weekly demonstrations take place as people call on the Japanese to atone for their sins, apologize, and pay reparations to the few surviving victims of sexual slavery. Now we are outside of Gyeongbokgung, the biggest and most significant of Seoul's royal palaces. Needless to say, a great deal of Korean history took place here. Yeah, who can forget what happened on October 8, 1895? A group of Japanese samurai busted in and murdered Queen Min, wife of King Gojong. They did not leave until they had desecrated her body. The Japanese did all they could to obliterate Korean culture, Korean history, indeed Korean identity. Starting in 1911, they began systematically destroying Gyeongbokgung. Of its 400 buildings, only 10 were saved. The gate you see here is a faithful reconstruction of what the Japanese razed a century ago. In its place, they constructed the massive Government General Building in 1926. All of this was symbolic, intended to show the Koreans that what existed before was gone and the Japanese were in firm control. The Government General Building, hated though it was, lasted another 50 years. It served as home for the National Assembly until 1975 and the National Museum of Korea for 10 years. One more thing. We all know that the Japanese surrendered on August 15, 1945, but the U.S. military did not begin to fully administer Seoul until September 9. Thus, the Japanese had 25 days to destroy incriminating evidence about the so-called comfort women and other matters during their brutal 36-year colonial rule. Anything that might have been useful in war crimes trials was put to the flame. Massive amounts of paper were shoved into the furnaces of the Government General Building and elsewhere before the Americans arrived. The burning went on 24 hours a day, non-stop. This is SEODAEMUN Prison, a place with a very dark past. As the name indicates, it was a prison, serving in that role from 1908 until 1987. It was built by the Japanese, their main purpose being to house, punish, and sometimes kill anti-colonial activists. Perhaps the most famous of them was a young woman named Yu Kwan-soon. After a long period of barbaric torture, she died here on September 28, 1920. Let's take a look at the execution chamber where so many Korean lives ended. Note the tall poplar tree just to the right. It's known as the wailing tree because so many condemned people clung to it and cried, refusing to go quietly to their deaths. I'm obliged to note that SEODAEMUN Prison remained in business after the Japanese were kicked out in 1945. Despotic right-wing South Korean presidents such as Syngman Rhee, Park Chung-hee, and Chun Doo-hwan used it to incarcerate their opponents and other criminals. Former President Lee Myung-bak spent 3 months here in late 1964 for criticizing the government's plan to reestablish diplomatic relations with Japan. When a new prison was built in Anyang in the late 1980s, this facility was turned into a museum. We are now at Independence Gate, erected in 1897 mostly at the behest of a man named Seo Jae Pil, or Philip Jason. He was an indefatigable independence activist and also the first Korean to become a naturalized citizen of the USA. For more than 1,000 years, Korea had been a vassal state to China. That ended after the Chinese suffered a military defeat to Japan in 1894. Jason and his colleagues, including future President Syngman Rhee, were responsible for destroying Yongunmun, the gate where subservient Koreans had traditionally paid tribute to visiting Chinese envoys. The only part that remains is the two pillars you see there. Jason, Rhee et al. Replaced Yongunmun with Independence Gate, which has a clear resemblance to the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Their not-so-subtle message to Japan was, "We are a free and independent country. Don't even think of trying to take over." You can be assured the Japanese paid no mind to Jason and Rhee, who were sent into exile, not to return until 1947 and 1945, respectively. Welcome to Bosingak, originally constructed in 1396, but destroyed and rebuilt numerous times. Isn't this a splendid pavilion? During the Joseon Dynasty, the bell was rung to announce the opening of Seoul's 4 gates in the morning and their closing at night. More currently, at midnight every New Year's Eve, a massive crowd gathers to hear the Bosingak bell rung 33 times. Our focus today, however, is the end of Japanese colonial rule in the summer of '45. When the news was announced that Hirohito and his generals, their hands drenched in blood, had surrendered, the Bosingak bell was rung joyously, almost non-stop. The next stop on our historical tour is Topgol Park. Something very significant happened here 96 years ago. This is where the Korean Declaration of Independence was read out on March 1st, 1919. First, however, a ceremony took place at the Myeongwol Kwan restaurant a few blocks to the west. 33 bold and courageous men gathered to sign the document. They probably had a ceremony too, though no record was made of it. These guys were not working in a vacuum because when they left the Shikdang and walked here, several thousand people were waiting. The Japanese military police must have known something was up, and they found out soon enough. Our 33 heroes stood before the crowd and read the manifesto fearlessly. These are the first few lines. "We herewith proclaim the independence of Korea and the liberty of the Korean people. We tell it to the world in witness of the equality of all nations, and we pass it on to our posterity as their inherent right. We make this proclamation back of us 5,000 years of history and 20 million united, loyal people." When they had finished reading the declaration, the throng shouted, "Mansei, Mansei, Mansei." Mansei means long live Korea. The Japanese responded mercilessly, imprisoning, beating, and killing thousands of people. The movement was crushed, but who can deny that this was a necessary step on the road to liberation? What you see here is now called the Seoul Metropolitan Library, but between 1925 and 2012 it was City Hall. Erected by the Japanese, it is even today a big and impressive Renaissance-style stone building. Just across the street is Doksu Palace. Although the Japanese constructed it, City Hall did not engender the intensely negative passions that another building, the Government General Building, did. It was razed in 1995, but this one, as you see, remains standing. The grass-covered plaza in front has been the scene of numerous large gatherings, both cultural and political. Just last night, there was a big K-pop concert here to celebrate the 70th anniversary of freedom from Japanese rule. It ended with a song about unification by a choir made up of North Korean defectors. The plaque out in front of this building says it was home to the National Assembly from independence in 1945 until the current facility was erected in Yeouido 30 years later. Not so. As indicated earlier, the National Assembly met in the former Government General Building at the northern end of Gwanghwamun Plaza, also known as Sejong Street, where we are right now. Perhaps you know that the Japanese, in their never-ending quest to demonstrate they were in charge, renamed Seoul. They called it Keijo. The building we are looking at, constructed in the mid-1930s, was Keijo Public Hall. It had and still has an 1,800-seat auditorium and a 9-story clock tower. My understanding is that it served primarily as a cultural center before being turned into an annex to the nearby City Hall. Having survived World War II, the Korean War, and other forms of turbulence, it has seen a lot of history. This is Seoul Station, known originally to the Japanese who built it in 1925 as Keijo Station. It has a Byzantine central dome, and it seems to be in good shape after 90 years. A major renovation project was completed in 2011, and it now serves as a cultural center. The 100,000 people who take trains in and out of Seoul every day use a much bigger and more modern facility next door. Even today, some right-wingers in Japan stubbornly defend their country's colonial efforts in Korea. One of the most frequent justifications is, "But we built them the railroads." Indeed, they built numerous stations and hundreds of miles of track, although Koreans did most of the back-breaking labor. And this was no favor to Korea. The Japanese wanted to be able to move quickly and easily around the country they had a firm grip on. For example, railroads helped them in the process of shipping huge quantities of rice back to Japan. Did you know that at one point in the colonial era, 80% of the rice produced in Korea was eaten by Japanese people? Let me draw your attention to a statue of Kong Woo-kyu. At Seoul Station in 1920, he threw a bomb that was meant to kill Governor General Saito Makoto. Kong failed, was seized, and was soon executed. His name deserves to be mentioned alongside those of others who were willing to risk their lives for Korean independence, such as An Jong-gun, Yoon Bong-gil, and Lee Bong-chang. We are now at Dongdaemun History and Culture Park, a facility whose ultra-modern architecture I find a bit disconcerting. That is neither here nor there. Its predecessor, Dongdaemun Stadium, was built in 1925, and you know by whom. Perhaps the Japanese constructed the stadium with the idea of giving their Korean subjects an outlet for their physical and emotional energy. I am surmising, but the Japanese might have figured, let them play soccer and baseball and have track meets. They are less likely to rebel if they have such diversions. Try to imagine what it was like here on August 15, 1945. World War II, with all its sufferings and depredations, was finally over. The Japanese, who had inflicted so much pain on the Koreans, Chinese, Filipinos, and others, had been defeated. Freedom had finally returned to the land of the morning calm. Of course, nobody at the time knew that the Americans and Russians would divide the country at the 38th parallel, and that actual independence would be delayed until 1948. The point is, Korea was no longer under the yoke of the Japanese. A crowd estimated at 250,000 packed Dongdaemun Stadium in the surrounding neighborhoods. Speeches were given, songs were sung, and I'm willing to bet the Mansei cheer was raised a few times. Thanks for joining us on our tour around Seoul to commemorate the 70th Liberation Day. In conclusion, I want to turn the microphone over to Chol Eun-rim. Not only is he smart and eloquent, but he's a native of this country. His perspective is bound to be different from mine in some ways. Chol Eun?
안녕하십니까. LBC 임철입니다. 오늘 리차드 패닝턴이랑 여러분들과 같이 광복절을 맞아서 10군데 역사적인 곳을 돌아다녀 봤는데 굉장히 힘들어요. 지금 땀이 나고 이런 정도인데 어쩌면 우리가 1년 내내 이렇게 살아왔어야 될 걸 오늘 하루에 몰아살기 때문에 힘든 것 같다는 생각이 듭니다. 오늘 하루 굉장히 뜻깊었고 이런 자리를 통해서 한국의 슬픈 부분, 나쁜 부분, 미국인의 시간, 또 한국인이 새로운 시간을 주었던 리차드 패닝턴에게 굉장히 큰 감사를 드리면서 오늘 영상 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
나를 버리고 가시니